My name is Lawrence Jarach. I am 64 years old. I currently live in El Cerrito, California, and I was born in Tacoma, Washington. So my upbringing was lower middle class. Um, it's an interesting phenomenon of learning at an early age about not asking for things because there wasn't any disposable income in the home. It was a lot of show, but not a lot of substance. So there were pretensions of being solidly middle class, and we just didn't have the income. So there was, I learned to stop asking for toys because the answer was always no. So yeah, that was an interesting aspect, but that's the economic aspect of my upbringing. My education, I got a Bachelor of Arts in Cultural Anthropology way back in the 80s from University of California, Santa Barbara. I've had a bunch of weird jobs over the span of my work career. Um, the best job and worst job I ever had was working as an emergency medical technician in the 911 system of the county where I used to live. Uh, did that for 12 years. Can't do it anymore. Post-traumatic stress. My parents, they were very active in the anti-Vietnam War movement, to the point where 4 or 5 times over the course of the early 1970s, when I was a preteen, we had, like I said, 4 or 5 times, we had lodgers for several days. And it wasn't until I got into high school that my mother told me that we were actually a stop on the way for draft resistors going to Canada. So that was my introduction to politics, and it was definitely on the direct action wing of things. So my political trajectory was definitely anti-war, informed by anti-war sentiment. Um, when I started to learn more about history and philosophy and political science, um, that morphed very easily into a staunch anti-militarism. Um, and it was through my anti-militarist activities that I learned about anarchism, learned about anarchists, met some anarchists, and learned that anti-militarism is one of the foundational principles of anarchist philosophy. So that's why it became very attractive to me. Um, that was in the late 1970s, early 1980s, when I graduated from college and moved back to the Bay Area. I started hanging around and meeting anarchists at Bound Together Books. Uh, Volunteered for 3 years in that collective. Um, yeah, like a lot of anarchists in the Bay Area. I did my time at Bound Together, uh, and that was a good way of getting contacts and learning more and more about the philosophy, both through books, journals, zines, and informal conversations. I actually did meet some anarchists in college. Um, that didn't pan out into anything consistent over the years. It was after college that I became more mm, actively involved in conversations, activities. Yeah, because I didn't have to study, just had to work. From reading various flyers and newspapers and having short conversations with other people who were handing out literature at various anti-war demonstrations or gatherings. I didn't find anything that I was particularly interested in other than the anarchist stuff. I never went through a Marxist phase, um, so I was never particularly attracted to a Leninist model of organizing uh, or activity. So I went right from anti-militarism to anarchism. It was a seamless transition, and in fact, anti-militarism remains a, a fundamental aspect of my way of understanding anarchism. Well, it's easy to say what you're against. Um, so I am against militarism. I'm against capitalism. I'm against all of the interlocking institutions that make up the state. Against prisons, courts, police. So what am I for then? I am for increased individual and communal responsibility, autonomy, self-organization based on affinity rather than any kind of overriding sociocultural construct like nation or tribe or whatever. I mean, yeah, affinity works really well. It's a long-standing anarchist practice anyway. And putting things in the forefront like mutual aid, solidarity, and definitely direct action, like non-representational decision making and implementation. I am one of those crazy anarchists who thinks that the implementation of a decision is as important as making the decision, and that it should be as direct as possible, um, and non-representational, and yeah, the issue of decision making is probably a tangent you don't want to go down. I don't know. Maybe you do. I don't know. It's a topic that stirs up a lot of controversy within anarchist circles and between anarchists and other folks. Sorry, I didn't mean to go on that tangent. Um, but yeah, engaging in relationships that are not based on hierarchy, whether temporary or permanent. So there's definitely the anti-authoritarian aspect of anarchism, I think, is really important to foreground in any discussion of what the philosophy means and how it looks, what it looks like between people, and between people and their environment. Well, it depends if you want to be an influential person or an activist, like being in frontline activism. Um, I don't have a playbook. There is no playbook. What anarchists should do at any given time, um, aside from perhaps modeling an anti-hierarchical and anti-authoritarian way of engaging with other people, in a way that avoids relationships of domination and submission, and works to put people on a more equitable footing when engaging with each other. Um, when I was an activist, um, I'm sure I had a lot more ideas about what people should be doing, but mostly I kept those ideas to myself or with in discussions with a few trusted other people, people with whom I shared affinity around what we should be doing. Uh, there are no anarchist programs for uh, what people need to do in order to be anarchists in a situation where anarchism is a minority tendency. Um, so looking at current events, uh, like Okay, so for me, I work at a union shop, and 8 months ago I became a shop steward. So that's what I do. Is I look out for myself and my coworkers in relationships that are adversarial with management. Uh, we have we have a contract, we have a collective bargaining agreement that uh, that management violates constantly. And so I am one of four stewards in the office who work on filing grievances uh, to make our conditions at work a little bit better, or not a little bit better, how they should be according to the national agreement. So that's where my activity is focused right now, is at the workplace. And I never thought I would be a shop steward because I'm not a syndicalist, and so I don't have that workplace organizing ethos that a lot of syndicalists have. In fact, I find anarchist syndicalism to be kind of boring and uninteresting and not a revolutionary path. And I haven't changed my mind about that, but uh, I'm happy that I work in a union shop, and I'm happy that we have a collective bargaining agreement because it makes my life easier and it makes the lives of my coworkers easier. And so when I am engaged in steward activity, I try to bring an anarchist sensibility to it, which is sometimes difficult because it's a business union. We're affiliated with the American Federation of Labor. At the branch meetings, it always begins with a pledge of allegiance. Everything's got to be legal. Everything's got to be yeah, legal. And so that runs counter to my temperament. It runs counter to my yearning for uh, action, workplace action outside of the union, and sometimes necessarily against the union, um, in a conflict situation. Um, and so, it puts me in a contradictory position, and it's interesting to look at it as much as I can from the outside, or take a bird's eye view and say, okay, so here I am doing this thing that I never thought I'd be doing, and I'm still an anarchist. And how do I reconcile those things? And mostly what I do is I try to educate my coworkers about what the collective bargaining agreement says and what the bosses are allowed or not allowed to do. And so my goal as a steward is to bring that knowledge to as much of the workforce as is interested in it, so that we don't have to rely on the four stewards in the office to say to the managers, I'm going to do this, but you know that it's against the collective bargaining agreement, and if you make me do it, there's going to be a grievance filed, and you're going to lose. So there's not just the four of us saying that, but it's everybody at the workplace. And the goal with that is to make the workplace a little more hospitable for us drones, the slugs who actually do the work, and to keep management from being such a bunch of assholes and harassing, domineering fearmongers who are union busters. Well, I don't know how to do that in a broader sense, but I do know how it affects my workplace. My workplace is incredibly diverse. There are 4 or 5 different languages spoken on the workroom floor at any given time during the time when people are in the office. Um, Mandarin, Tagalog, Hindi, English, Spanish. Um, is that 5? I think that's 5. So there isn't also our local branch of the union had declared itself a sanctuary branch, so that part of what we are doing is reaching out to immigrant communities and standing with them against this kind of scapegoating, um, and doing it in an official capacity, um, not on a national level, but on a branch level. So in the greater Bay Area, we've got a pretty strong, not necessarily a visible presence, but definitely a known presence. So that's actually really easy, and it's easy because of where I live. The Bay Area is a very diverse place. It's always been an immigrant centric area, as well as having a large Native community. Because that's one of those things. Okay, here's my little tangent. Another little tangent. I get very annoyed when people say we are all immigrants, because we're not. Because there are Native people who still live in these areas who never immigrated from anywhere. They've always been here, and I'm happy to say that they're still here. Um, and I live on a particular piece of land that is in the process of being rematriated, which is fantastic. I love the people who are working on that, and I support them all the time. So that's one thing that I often wind up saying in situations where immigrants are scapegoated, when especially white liberals say, "Oh, we're all immigrants." I have to remind people, as a non-native person, you know what though? We're not. There are some people who've been here longer, didn't immigrate. So let's remember that, and honor that. Um, but to get back to your question about the right wing talking points around workplace issues, again, I'm lucky that I already have a very diverse workplace and a very diverse workforce. Um, so that hasn't been an issue for me. The main area of right wing backlash that I face is on social media, where people, without a great deal of critical thinking skills, will perhaps unknowingly repeat and promote right wing talking points. Uh, there's a particular Facebook group that I'm in that is for anarchists, and there's a guy who posts shit there, and he loves talking about the Democrats and how horrible they are. And he never talks about how horrible the Republicans are. And he never talks about how horrible the police are. He never talks about how horrible capitalism is. He's just only talking about the Democrats. And I call him on it constantly, every time. I tell him to take his right wing talking points and shove them up his ass. It's probably not the best way to be in a decent dialogue, but I don't have time to tweeze out what the right wing talking points are. If they're not self evident, then there's no reason to talk to someone. I don't like this is basic political philosophy, and I don't have the stomach for it. So I don't consider myself an educator when it comes to responding to that kind of crap. Here's one thing that's been bothering me about anarchists, some anarchists, um, and it's the intrusion of a particular kind of Cold War anti-imperialism into anarchist discourse, and it's happened since probably the Second World War. Since the aftermath of the Second World War, when anti-imperialism really started to get going on the left, and the problem that I have with anti-imperialism is that one, it's not specifically anarchist. There's nothing wrong with something not being anarchist. Just have to acknowledge it. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do something if it's not particularly anarchist, if you're an anarchist. There's lots of stuff that's not anarchist that anarchists do all the time. And that's okay. But to then say that this thing that's not anarchist is something that all anarchists should be doing because it's really anarchist after all, that's when I object. So I object to anti-imperialism because anti-imperialists always wind up taking sides in inter-imperialist conflicts. That means that on a smaller level, they wind up supporting smaller states in conflicts with larger states. But anarchists don't want to have any states. So no state is legitimate in an anarchist perspective. From a consistent anarchist philosophical perspective, no state has legitimacy. There is no reason for an anarchist to accept any military that goes along with a state. There's no reason for any anarchist to accept that there's a prison system in any state. We are opposed to all of these things. This is basic, fundamental principles. So anti-imperialism became a very popular organizing methodology and analysis for a lot of anarchists in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, up until the point where the Soviet Union collapsed. And then things got a little bit even more hazy, so that now that there are some anarchists, and I know you've interviewed some of them because I saw the list of people that you've spoken to already, who support the Ukrainian military against the Russian invasion. This is unacceptable as a perspective to take as an anarchist. Anarchists are anti-militarists. Should people defend themselves against an invading army? Absolutely. Should they do it under the auspices of whatever state happens to be sovereign in that area? Absolutely not. This is a basic, fundamental principle of anarchism. We are anti-militarist. We are anti-nationalist. We are in the parlance of folks on the left who were against the First World War. We work for radical desertion. We want everyone to desert their militaries. If everyone deserted, nobody would be able to fight. So the officers would be left with saber rattling each other. And that's fine. Let them do that. So there's no reason for people to fight war. Radical defeatism. That's the terminology. Sorry, not radical desertion. Radical defeatism. We want every army to lose. Not because they've been killed, but because they've left. Leave the front. Go away. Don't fight. Resist the draft. Resist your orders. Fraternize with the enemy. This is how anti-militarism works. That, and again, that's my origin story, right? My parents doing stuff for against the Vietnam War. So that's how I learned it. And it has remained with me ever since. And that's, again, it is a fundamental anarchist principle to be against militarism. You want to take up arms to defend your anarchist enclave? Cool, I'm good with that. But it's not a military, that's a militia. It's a difference. And so when people talk about defending or extending the radical project in Rojava among certain area of what could be called Kurdistan, at least that's not militarized. I still don't know I know that I don't. I don't even critically support that project, but I have my own reasons for that. But one of them isn't that they're militarized. That's not an issue. They don't have a state, so they don't have a military. Do they have a hierarchical situation? Maybe. I don't know. All the anarchists I know who've gone to Rojava and have come back and sung its praises say that no, it's not hierarchical. Okay, cool. I believe you. But it's not a project that I want to devote my time and energy to, which is different than actively supporting a state with an army and a military hierarchy that is a proxy for NATO. Yeah, I don't go for that. So some of the other folks you've interviewed are very much in favor of that kind of resistance, and I can't do it. Can't do it. I don't accept it, and I speak out about it. Well, you brought up two separate issues. You said support for Palestinian statehood, which is a no, and then support for the Palestinian people, which is a yes. The position of someone who's not involved in someone else's struggle, like I am not involved in the conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis. I don't have any skin in the game. So it's not up to me to decide for Palestinians how they resist. But I will say something about what they put in place of Israeli occupation, because that is in my interest as an anarchist. I'm not in favor of the creation of another state. I'm not I would be happy to see the Israeli state gone. But that doesn't mean that I support Palestinian statehood. So this is one of those tricky issues for folks on the left who are not anarchists, and for an anarchist like myself who does not consider himself part of the left. Like, the issue of the state is central in a generic leftist understanding of the world. Leftists want a state. They want a state run by leftists. Anarchists don't want a state, no matter who runs it. So even the most brilliant, most moral, most virtuous, most egalitarian-minded person who is involved in statecraft is not going to be virtuous or moral or ethical or non-domineering. Like they have an apparatus at their beck and call now. The apparatus is predicated on institutionalized hierarchies of domination and exploitation. I can't support anything like that. So I don't support a Palestinian state, but I do support Palestinian resistance to Israeli occupation. I mean, it's that often makes anarchists or anti-nationalists of any stripe sound kind of Pollyannish, like, well, yeah, well, we don't want this, we don't want that. But it's a matter of principle. Like there are anti-state communists who consider themselves Marxists, who are vehemently opposed to nationalism, any form of nationalism, and they're right. And I as much as I dislike Marxism and Marxists in general, I can get behind what those folks are saying. Like on that particular issue, we are 100% aligned. So Marxism is a philosophy that is geared toward political economy. So their focus generally is on issues of production and distribution of products and services. And I'm much more interested in degrowth. Marxists Like I would say 99% of Marxists are interested in having a state to administer their political economy. Um, Engels talks about the state as the administration of things rather than as the bossing around of people. Um, but that's just a definitional issue. When Marxists talk about the state, they're talking about something that's different from how anarchists understand the state. Um, they often we Marxists and anarchists often have a distinct understanding of what economics is, what capitalism looks like. Um, Marxists are usually authoritarians because they believe themselves smarter, more hooked into something like objective truth, like scientific socialism. Uh, because they're smart, it's therefore their responsibility to teach and guide the rest of us stupid people for our own good. So, I'm doing this for your own benefit is one of the first authoritarian lies that's ever told to young people. And Marxists continually say that, or they imply it in pretty much everything that they do. So I it's like is there any place where anarchists and Marxists can actually coexist in a positive way? Um, I don't know. It's not my project to find out. Um, most of the most of the stuff that I've seen or heard that attempts some kind of reconciliation is coming from Marxists, because they know that their crap ain't so popular anymore. So it's like the last place they can go that it has an actual radical pedigree that hasn't been uh, twisted by success, for fortunately or unfortunately, is anarchism. We're the last place where there is a principled anti-capitalist, anti-statist perspective, and I don't know what to do about those overtures because unless they unless they reject their outmoded understanding of what capitalism is and its incredible amount of adaptability, uh, and unless they reject the idea of uh, a dictatorship of the proletariat, and unless they reject the idea of anti-imperialism, I have nothing in common with them. Almost nothing. Again, the definitions of what they're against are distinct from the definitions of what I'm against. We can use the same terminology, but they mean something different. It's a weird thing. Um, Again, there are anti-state communists, anti-party communists. They're an even smaller minority than anarchists. And I have no problem. I've worked with folks like that for close to 30 years, maybe even longer. They keep winding up in the same places as I am. And and we all wound up in the same place when Occupy was happening. Um, there we were all together again. Like, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. Everything okay? Yeah, everything's okay. And we actually there were about 12 to 18, close to 20 people at one point of us who coalesced into an ad hoc little committee of ourselves. And we called ourselves the anti-bureaucratic bloc. And we issued statements about the incipient bureaucratization of the leadership, the self-appointed leadership of Occupy Oakland. And, we had no problems working with each other on any of that stuff. Because we already knew we knew each other from long standing. And then, younger folks who I knew, I had no problem inviting them in and saying, look, these folks are Marxists, but so we know what we're opposing. And these are the people, these incipient bureaucrats, and who were not just Marxists. There were a couple of anarchists who were involved in the creation of a self-selected bureaucracy at Occupy Oakland as well. And we did our best to warn other people about what was happening. And we had a few things to say, and it was a good time. Occupy Oakland was a high watermark for a lot of folks in the Bay Area. I know that Occupy in other areas was a little, they were a little less interesting, but a lot of good things came out of Occupy. A lot of bad things too. As any experimental social moment is bound to have, lots of really exciting things and lots of really shitty things. Well, it's people making their own mistakes, which I'm in favor of, as opposed to Marxists. Marxists don't like people making mistakes. And I believe that people learn from making mistakes. And so that's a good way to bring it back around to the Marxist anarchist question. Marxists have a lot of things that they want to do, and they have a lot of answers. And my preference is for questions, more questions, and ask another question. You can even answer a question with another question. That's okay. That's part of actual dialectics, not fake Marxist dialectics.